this is before we even get on to the energy giants. Really? I don't pay taxes. And that's before we even get on to the energy giants. After months of resistance from this Prime Minister, the government has finally been dragged kicking and screaming to extend the windfall tax that Labour have been calling for since January. Yet they still leave billions of pounds on the table. Profits that are the windfalls of war. Because they have failed to close a huge loophole that they created that hands out massive tax breaks to those oil and gas giants for doing the things that they were going to do anyway. For those wondering why, some energy giants have paid no windfall tax in the last quarter, despite record profits and eye-watering bills for consumers. The answer is the decisions that this Prime Minister made when he was Chancellor, confirmed by the current Chancellor, lets the energy giants off the hook once again. Mr. Speaker, the government has announced plans for energy bills next year, but bill payers will still see prices go up next spring, leaving far too many people wondering how they'll make ends meet. For every pound of windfall tax left on the table, people are faced with higher prices on their bills. And the Tories' failure on energy goes back much further. They closed down gas storage, blocked onshore wind and solar, and slashed support for home insulation. Now, today the Chancellor says that he will act on energy efficiency, but I'm afraid it's all far too late. We called for the insulation of 2 million homes a year more than 12 months ago that could cut bills by £1,000, not just for 1 year, but for every year to come. And they did nothing. Insulation levels in 2021 were 20 times lower than in 2010 because of their neglect. And now he proposes a package, but we have to wait until 2025 for them to act. Why? When people are facing a bills crisis now, years and years will have gone by while he sits back. Millions of families could have been helped, and they have not been.
It's Rachel Reeves there, Labour's Shadow Chancellor, responding to the autumn statement from Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt setting out his priorities as being stability, growth and public services. He said the government was responding to an international crisis, but with British values. He said it was a recession made in Russia, but there was a recovery made in Britain. Rachel Reeves says Britain's problems started before the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, saying the mess we are in is not a result of 12 weeks of Conservative chaos, but 12 years of Conservative economic policy. Let me just take you through some of the key things we've learned in just the last hour. Inflation expected to average 9.1% this year, 7.4% next year. It's according to forecasts from the Office of Budget Responsibility, which thinks Britain is already in recession. Overall, the economy is still forecast to grow by 4.2% this year, then shrink next year before growing again in the years that followed. Although, as Dominic O'Connor, our colleague, was pointing out earlier, these growth forecasts tend to be a bit optimistic. Borrowing this year, £177 billion. Then this year, that's £140 billion next year. Then falling after that. A £55 billion package of tax rises and spending cuts. The wealthiest being, the highest paid anyway, the rate you start paying, the 45p rate, will fall from £150,000 to £125,000. There's also thresholds being frozen, so the rates you start paying, the income tax personal allowance, the high rate threshold, the main national insurance rate thresholds, inheritance tax as well, all frozen for 2 years. So more people, as inflation pushes up the amount of money you're earning, more people being trapped in that. If you've got an electric car because you don't pay any vehicle tax, that's going. You will have to start paying that. The stamp duty cut put in place by Kwasi Kwarteng will remain. The windfall tax on energy companies is being extended from 25% to 35%. Labour will see that as a win. There's also a big one hitting energy supplies, electricity generators as well. A re-evaluation of business rates from 2023 could mean higher bills for some firms. And then on spending, Jeremy Hunt said the amount of money promised to government departments will remain in cash terms for the next 2 years. But obviously, lots of demands, not least for more money for pay increases for staff. After that, spending will grow by 1% a year in real terms above inflation. He promised to protect the defence budget at 2% of GDP, not the 3% the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace wanted. There's more money for schools and more money for social care and the NHS. As a new nuclear power station coming for Sizewell C, that's been announced, and more money to insulate your loft. So hopefully that will bring down bills in the future. Benefits rising in line with inflation and pensions too, and the national minimum wage rising by 9.7%, so just below inflation, to an hourly rate of £10.42 from April next year. Lucy Fisher, Times Radio's chief political commentator, and Dominic O'Connell, our business correspondent here. Lucy, your first big immediate takeaway from all of that?
Well, it's largely as trailed on the tax front, isn't it, Matt? In terms of personal taxes, it is the wealthier who are going to be hit hugely by the lowering of that top income tax threshold coming down from 150 grand to 125 grand. Also, the removal of 3/4 of the allowances for capital gains tax and for dividend tax, albeit in stages over the next 2 years. Energy firms as well facing a big windfall tax, as we expected. That will raise a lot of money, 14 billion. I thought it was interesting and politically astute on the spending side that health and education are getting a bit of a boost, more than I was actually expecting. So over the next 2 years, 3 billion extra for the NHS and 4.7 billion extra for social care, although reform of social care delayed yet again. Will that ever happen? I'm hard to see how. An education budget getting almost 5 billion over the next 2 years for schools. So those are issues that voters care most about. I think it's probably a wise move to have given them some extra cash.
Dominic O'Connell, explain to us how this works, because it sounds like half of the 55 billion he says is coming from spending, and yet all he really announced was increases in spending for schools and hospitals. How does he save money there?
It's what you alluded to. It's the effect of inflation, basically giving him a 10% cut every year. If you don't increase something, but inflation in cash terms, but inflation is creeping up by 10% a year, then you are making that cut whether you like it or not. And I think households actually will feel this most of all. Just going through the OBR is forecasting next year a 7% fall in household disposable incomes. I think that is the biggest fall ever, and will take household incomes back to 2013 levels. They're also forecasting a 9% fall in house prices. The other thing that really strikes me about what Jeremy Hunt said is that despite all these savings that he's doing and tax rises, total UK government debt as a proportion of GDP hardly moves at all. It peaks in 2025 at 97.6% of GDP, so close to 100% of GDP. By 27-28, it's still only shrunk just to 97.3%. So they're running really hard to move the dial on GDP, to have a fiscal target in it by a tiny amount.
And when we say, there's lots of talks of balancing the books, they're not balancing the books. There's still billions of pounds being borrowed every year.
No, they're not balancing the books.
Any market reaction yet? I know it's early because
yes,
only been
yes, there is,
down.
because the government isn't going to be borrowing as much as markets had feared this year and next year. So they're not going to be issuing as many gilts. That means gilt yields have already started to move. As we're looking at the 10-year gilt yield, which is one that people do focus on, it's moved from about 3.3% to 3.14% just in the past hour as people have digested this idea. So that's quite a big move for gilts, a move in the right direction as far as the government's concerned.
Okay, let's bring in now Ben Zaranko from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Afternoon, Ben.
Good afternoon.
What leaps out for you? I mean, it's all quite stealthy, isn't it? Dragging people into paying income tax thresholds they might not otherwise have done, telling government departments where you can have the same amount of cash, and the fact that everything costs more as your own business.
Yes, there's definitely a large element of allowing inflation to do the work for him. I think the big picture is that he's loosened his fiscal rules. He's now changed the targets to allow for more borrowing and more debt than was previously allowed. He's announced a big package of stealthy tax rises. He's announced a squeeze on public spending after the next election. And yet, as you just said, he's only just on track to be meeting those rules. And that really is because of the dramatic deterioration in the outlook for the economy and for the public finances. For the economy, that's mainly a story of higher energy prices just bearing down on how much growth we're expecting to get. And on the fiscal side, we're going to be spending an extraordinary amount on debt interest compared to what we've spent in recent years. And that higher interest cost for the government is really what's making the choices on tax and spending even more difficult. And that's really at the heart of the Chancellor's policy response today.
And in terms of, because lots of people listening to this want to know how they are personally going to feel. I mean, clearly the fact that for the people at the bottom, benefits are rising in line with inflation, a big rise, albeit just below the rate of inflation in the national living wage, the pensions triple lock. How tough is life going to be for normal people on normal incomes over the next year or so?
Life is going to be tough. I think that it's true that certain elements like the pensions triple lock and so state pension, like working age benefits, will go up broadly, more or less in line with inflation. There's no sign that private sector earnings will keep pace with inflation this year, but they're doing a lot better than public sector earnings. And so people in work are probably going to be feeling very much a squeeze. There's also the Chancellor's announced that the energy support package will be sort of phased out marginally for better off people. So their bills will rise in April, which will add pain there too. It's going to be a very difficult couple of years. I don't think there was too much sugarcoating of that. I think the Chancellor made that clear. But what he did do was try to blame global headwinds and global economic forces beyond his or the government's control. And I think there's certainly some truth to that, but you could be forgiven if you'd just forgotten that the mini budget happened less than 2 months ago and the impact that's had on some of these things too.
And that's an interesting point, isn't it, Lucy? There's the clear. He kept on all the way through the statement. Jeremy Hunt saying this is all down to external forces. We're just reacting to what's happening in Russia, the fallout of the pandemic. And the Labour Party really try to pin this on the government. So this is your fault. We were in a financial mess before. You've made it worse. You're clearing up your own mess.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the people who will feel really pinched and most aggrieved, I think, in a way, are the middle earners for whom a lot of the tax burden will fall. Wealthier people can possibly afford the tax rises they're going to see. There has been a lot of help rolled out for the poorest, with universal credit rising in line with inflation, these new cost of living payments, the rent rise on social housing capped. That's still going to be expensive for those people, but there's a lot of help. There's just very little for middle earners who are feeling the squeeze and who I think will feel very angry that they're feeling the pinch with nothing really in it for them.
And how difficult is this going to get for business, Dom? Because on the one hand, people have less money in their pockets. They're not going to go out and spend it. I mean, I suppose the one thing that businesses want more than anything is certainty. Do you think that if you were holding off on investing in some expanding your business, if you were holding off on that, would this encourage you to do it, or do you just batten down the hatches?
Well, the UK economy is uniquely exposed to the consumer. It is is a big consumer-driven economy. So if you think the consumer is going to be much worse off next year, which the Office for Budget Responsibility thinks it is, it's going to be a very nasty squeeze on disposable income, then you probably hold off. However, Jeremy Hunt did stress the importance of growth, and he named 5 sectors: digital, life sciences, the green economy, financial services, and advanced manufacturing, where the government was going to spend some money. Whether that amounts to an industrial strategy, which we don't have one of course, ditched by Kwasi Kwarteng, I doubt. But there was something there for business, I think, but nothing there for oil and gas companies who are being encouraged to bid on a new North Sea licensing round and being given tax incentives to do so, but at the same time having the tax on their profits increase greatly.
Ben Zaranka from the IFS, just finally, put this into some sort of historical perspective. How big a deal is today?
I think this is has a potential, at least, to be a very historically significant budget. There are echoes of 1997 with very, very tight spending plans penciled in beyond the next election. And what that does is almost set the baseline from which the parties will be arguing about what they ought to do and how they're going to pay for it. So I think in that sense, it's very important. And it also pencils in now these tax threshold freezes right through to the second half, almost the end of this decade, where none of these things like income tax thresholds are now just not expected to increase at all. And again, that becomes the baseline. So in terms of locking in policy, I think this has potential to be very significant. Yes.
Ben, thanks so much for that. Ben Zaranka there from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. If you are just joining us on Times Radio, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, in the last hour setting out a pretty big autumn statement. The one from Kwasi Kwarteng we called a mini budget. There's nothing mini about this. So in terms of the top line issues that you'll want to know about, a freeze in the income tax threshold, as Ben was just saying, will mean millions of people paying more in income tax. At the very top, Jeremy Hunt reducing the threshold at which you start paying the 45p rate. That's coming down from 150,000 to 125,000. There'll be an increase in the national living wage from the current level of £9.50 an hour for over 23s up to over £10. Support for energy bills announced by Liz Truss will remain in place. But from April, the energy price guarantee that capped average bills to £2,500 will rise to £3,000. The pensions triple lock will be maintained, so pensions will go up by 10% from April, along with benefits rising in line with inflation as well. As Don was just saying, energy firms hit with an expanded windfall tax of 35%. That's up from 25%. And your electric car will no longer be exempt from vehicle excise duty from April 2025. Most of the savings in public spending being made by just freezing planned spending. So it's not rising in line with inflation. So if government department, which is unlike the NHS and schools, are getting more money, but other government departments will just have to try to achieve the same amount with the money they were promised before, despite the cost of everything going up. Lucy, we heard from Rachel Reeves earlier. Any more sort of broader political reactions so far?
I'm still waiting to see people coming out at the moment, Matt. I will update you as soon as we're getting more in.
I mean, there's a big challenge here for the up until now. Was it 5 weeks, 5-6 weeks of Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak? Conservative MPs have been pretty well behaved up until now, basically waiting for this moment. Do you think he will have done enough to keep all wings of what is already a pretty fractured Conservative Party happy?
Well, I think people will vote for it. I think you get very few people planning to rebel on what will clearly be made a confidence motion, although there was some suggestion yesterday from Esther McVey, former pension secretary, that she wouldn't support huge tax rises without getting rid of what she called vanity projects like HS2. And today, I think I'm actually a little bit surprised by Jeremy Hunt committing to all the infrastructure, road and rail projects that had been that are on the table. I think many people had expected a little bit of a cut in investment, capital investment there. I think there'll be grumbling from the moderates on foreign aid staying at 0.5% of GNI for the next 5 years. You know, people had hoped it would rise again to the 0.7%, which was a manifesto pledge.
And it was interesting, he sort of heaped praise on Andrew Mitchell,
Yes.
former International Development Secretary, now backing government. Previously, he'd have probably led the rebellion on exactly that. Jeremy Hunt would probably have joined it as well.
Yes.
And now they're all
now they're
locked in.
bound in.
Yeah.
Now they're bound in. So look, I think there will be grumbling about measures and the scale of tax rises. You know, it's just, as Chancellor, Rishi Sunak was the Conservative Chancellor who's raised taxes to their highest level in 70 years. It goes even further today with him as Prime Minister. There will be disgruntlement there, but by and large, at this stage of the game, I think people will broadly support it.
Dom, in terms of reassuring the markets, given that this is basically what this is an exercise in, it all went haywire with Kwasi Kwarteng. Has he done enough, do you think? Has he done too much? Could he have been a bit more generous and still, steadied the horses?
I think he possibly could, although it seems to have done the thing. We were talking about what's happening to gilt yields at the moment. Just again, looking at the OBR, in terms of total government debt, it'll be £400 billion higher at the end of this forecast period, at the end of 2027, going into 2028, than it was forecast to be in March. So total government borrowing is going to rise, even though, as we discussed before, we get that tiny blip down at the end of the forecast period. The other thing the OBR stresses, and I think should definitely be borne in mind, and Jeremy Hunt will have this at the back of his mind, is how sensitive this budget is to changes in two things. First of all, energy prices. Energy prices could really put a giant hole in this budget, or indeed help it an awful lot, make government spending a lot less large. And the second thing is interest rates. The OBR forecasts interest rates to peak at 5% next year in the UK. The Bank of England actually thinks it'll be less than that, but the OBR says sticking to the higher number. But international events and local events as well could intervene, and if interest rates go higher and the government ends up paying more interest on its debt, that will make a huge hole in the government's finances and make this budget look a hostage to fortune.
And it's an interesting point you make about energy. If we have a mild winter, people don't use as much. That's probably good news for the government. If you have a very cold winter, the government's picking up all of the extra on bills.
Exactly. So the temperature this winter will make a difference. Although gas prices this winter are not as high as most people forecast, because demand in Europe has fallen back, because Europe was able to fill up its reservoirs much more quickly than everybody thought. So the absence of Russian gas is not going to be that big a deal this winter. But for the following winter, most forecasters are expecting that is going to reverse, and gas prices will be high again next winter, just when we thought they might have come off. So it's next winter is a big pinch point now.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's Dominic O'Connell, Times Radio's business correspondent. Lucy Fisher, Times Radio's chief political commentator. We're with you throughout the afternoon, and I suspect well into the evening, here on Times Radio. Mariella Frostrup is up from 1. Well, she'll be here in just a sec, actually. We've lost Martin Lewis. Martin Lewis is supposed to be coming on. We don't know where he's gone, so instead we're going to do this. Yeah, we'll play our hugely popular quiz. Can you get to number 10? You know how it works. You just need to answer as many questions as you possibly can. Who is today's backbencher looking for promotion? Who's on the line, please? Hello?
Hi, it's Rob from Thiel, Reading.
Oh, very good. What do you do, Rob?
I'm not working at the moment. I'm looking for a job as an IT project manager.
Well,
if any going.
If anybody in the Reading area wants to get in touch, that'd be very good. Right, Rob, just because we're conscious of time, let's get on with it. Let's play Can You Get to Number 10? Question number 1. To become minister without portfolio, complete this well-known phrase, cut off your nose to spite your...
Face.
Is the correct answer. Question number 2 for digital culture, media and sport. Slightly Reading-y area question this. Who plays David Brent in the UK version of The Office?
Oh, God. I can't remember his name. Clue?
He played David Brent in The Office.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Well, I'll be honest, Rob. What you lack in knowledge, you make up for in keeping time on the radio. Go on, have a guess.
Yeah. I can't. I honestly, he's not even on the tip of my tongue. I can see his face.
No.
Ricky Gervais.
Shame to Reading.
Ricky Gervais. Yeah. Isn't he from Reading? Or He's from that area, isn't he?
He's from Reading, yeah. I used to live in Cemetery Junction, where he was from, yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well done, Rob. That was a huge success. You've become minister without portfolio. We'll get you a certificate out to you. The beauty of that is that we've managed to keep time. So that's at least something.
I'm glad I could help.
We'll send you a certificate. Thanks very much, Rob. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers, bye. And if you want to come on and play the quiz tomorrow, you can email me, matt@times.radio. Beautifully done. It means we've got a whole 40 seconds to speak to Mariella Frostrup.
That's more than enough, isn't it, Matt? Certainly for you, I can imagine. Well, that was interesting. I mean, I'm not sure that there was anything there that was a complete surprise. We've talked about a lot of it over the course of this week, but we're going to be talking about it a lot more in the course of my programme, just looking at how it's actually going to impact, family budgets, small businesses, councils, is the other big question. So there's just a lot to unpick, and we're going to carry on doing that. I'm going to play a little blast of Frank Sinatra at the beginning of the show as well, in case you're interested.
Well, that's something to look forward to. Mariella from 1, Jane and Fee from 3.